Just moving on to issues of the media in the British Isles, I guess. There are significant impediments to media freedoms in the UK and in Ireland. There's injunctions and super injunctions have been used in Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and there have been astronomical libel awards in Dublin. What are your views just on these sort of the climate at the moment?
We have to all understand the chilling effect that these injunctions can give. So even in a case where you might argue that an injunction was right or that someone was wronged as a result of publications and therefore should receive redress, the problem is that creates an environment where the press becomes extremely conservative in what information it is willing to reveal about people who have the capacity to use the court system. Now, if it was the case that every individual within a country could equally and fairly use the court system to apply for redress against wrongful publication, then we might say, okay, that's a fair and equal system, and we say that libels or potential libels should be seen if they're true, and compensation given in the case where there really was a genuine libel. The problem is that system is used predominantly, in fact overwhelmingly, by people who already have a lot of power. They already have a lot of money. They know how to use the court system. And so you end up with a situation where newspapers become reluctant to report on the abuses of the powerful, but are completely willing to report on the abuses of the powerless, or to defame the powerless. Mm-hmm. And that is not an acceptable situation. So that there has to be a level playing field. There has to be equal access to justice. And, the chance of repairing the justice system to be like that is almost non-existent. That's the reality. The justice system is not going to be a system where there is equal access. Working people have to spend their time working, not litigating, and it's expensive to litigate. Someone has to pay for it. So it's always going to be unequal in that sense. So we should instead level the playing field by preventing powerful people to have this right. Instead, they should have the right that everyone else has, which is to reply in kind. Already they're in a position where they, that their ability to project their voice in response is much greater. But with the internet now, everyone actually has some ability of right of reply, even if that's not standardized amongst journalistic ethics. So it's not the case that the press is never wrong. I never maintain that the press is never wrong. Certainly, I have been wronged many times by tabloid media. However, when we erect a system to address that wrong, we can produce a much greater wrong, which is to prevent the press from reporting the abuses of the powerful.
Julian, you referred to your own case there when you said you felt that you've been wronged and you've been put in the position yourself in the past. Can you speak about your own situation now with regard to the extradition request in Sweden?
Well, my own legal situation now is that we have the secret US grand jury in Alexandria, Virginia, trying to indict me and others for espionage. And on July 12, there will be a High Court appeal in relation to an extradition to Sweden. And the Swedish government say that they want to ask me questions about allegations relating to sexual abuse. So my current situation is that I have been detained either in prison or under house arrest without charge for 6 months on June 6. So almost 6 months now, detained without charge. There are no charges in this case. There is no allegation that there was any lack of consent in these cases, not even an allegation of that.
Just following from that, do you think yourself that the US would like to eventually extradite you?
Yes, there has been statements by senior US officials and politicians that is their intent. Oh, and the statement by the US ambassador to the UK in relation to its extradition of myself to the United States, that they would have to see how the Swedish case went. Similarly, Gates, the Defense Secretary of the United States, when he had heard that I had been detained, smiled and said that was very good news.
Do you feel that the pressure has eased a bit on you, or is it still maintained at the same level?
The level of the vitriolic rhetoric, the sort of quasi-McCarthyism that was happening in December, January and February, that has eased off a bit, in part by us saying that we would take legal action by people who kept asking for my assassination. That is incitement to commit murder. And there was a politician who was shot in the United States, a Democratic representative, and around the same time. So that created a bit more awareness in the United States of what incitements to assassinate can do.
Just when I was reading about some of the background to WikiLeaks and that, I noticed the Icelandic media initiative, and I guess I'm wondering, Ireland is a small country, not just as small as Iceland, but it's situated on the Atlantic between Asia and America. Would there be scope, in your opinion, for some sort of similar initiative to the Icelandic modern media initiative, freedom of speech and digitisation and things like that for Ireland? Would there be?
Well, I think so. Well, I mean, we can look at so why Iceland was good with this is that it is a relatively small political system, relatively small economy. So if the nation decides that it wants to do something, it can do it relatively quickly, and also a notion of independence, that it likes to be independent. So these things are true for Ireland as well. And we can see that if we look at, for example, Irish decisions to increase investment by adopting particular tax rates and so on, that those were a national decision in relation to attracting foreign investment. Of course, that particular decision was a rather crude one, which is we just lower the tax compared to other countries. And if we look at what had happened with other incentives that Ireland has brought up from time to time to attract foreign investment, well, this is like that, except it also has a moral calling. It also has an ethical calling. It's not just about undercutting the tax regimes of other countries. Rather, it's about promoting and strengthening the freedom of speech in Ireland and from the rest of the world, publishing from Ireland. Because of the internet, publishers can publish from any place, and that's going to be increasingly true, where TV stations have to base their content somewhere on the internet. Newspapers have to base their content somewhere on the internet.
Okay.
Just finally, Julian, the release of the Ireland cables coincides with the visit of President Barack Obama to Ireland. What's your view on his presidency so far, particularly in relation to human rights?
My view on Barack Obama is quite interesting. So Barack Obama is someone who doesn't have any family connections to the military intelligence complex in the United States. Doesn't have military connections. Now you would think that would mean that he's not corrupted by that influence, but it sort of the opposite effect has happened. It means that he doesn't understand what all that is about, and he has no handle on it. It's like he is trying to cook a soup, the soup of the United States, and in that soup there's the military-industrial complex is a very big player, and there's oil companies and there's the banking sector. And when he tries to stir it, well, he just doesn't have a spoon. He doesn't have anything to move this. So he is really at the mercy of it. He is like a cork floating in the waves that is pushed around by that big power group, and he merely represents what it does, and he represents its power. So it controls him rather than him controlling it. And that's, I think, his his biggest failing.
Well,
And as a leader, he has made compromise a virtue. So there are many different ways to lead. He says that compromise is the end game. The end result you want is compromise, and that I believe that is wrong. I think that is simply a method to get to a particular end state, and he seems to have confused the method and the goal. So he simply balances the forces around him and then represents it. So he's not going to change any underlying system because he's just compromising his forces.
And will the death of Osama bin Laden change any of that, do you think, and give him some traction within that military intelligence complex?
No, I don't think it will. You heard in his immediate response to the death of Osama bin Laden, taking credit for it in a way that wasn't quite gentlemanly, but also saying the fight goes on immediately. So if you were trying to wind down operations, you would say this is the end of a chapter. Finally, it's the end of a chapter. And we can go on to do different things. No, he felt that he had to appeal to that military intelligence base by saying, don't worry, we're not going to cut off the money. It's all going to go on, it's going to continue.